is it about the process of science or Women's History Month that you all find so scary?
Science is inherently queer.
Woke scientists are back at it with their activism, and they wonder why they're getting defunded. We're going to break down the latest interesting protests from the world of woke science and so much more on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, our politics, and our media, all from an independent perspective. Up first, on Friday, there were Stand Up for Science rallies across the country, with the biggest one taking place in Washington, D.C., where a variety of activists and activist scientists and left-of-center political figures got together to argue against and protest the Trump administration's policy changes and funding cuts for some forms of federal science. Now, these reforms the Trump administration is making are certainly controversial, and we can talk about parts of them that may be unjustified or misguided. But as you could probably expect, this protest descended into a display of partisanship and, frankly, woke hysteria and gobbledygook. My favorite was the one young woman who used her time speaking to this massive crowd to talk about how science is queer, to widespread applause. Take a listen.
Well, many wish to exclude the LGBTQIA plus community from the narrative, from history and research. I argue that science is inherently queer. To be queer is to question previously held beliefs, to inquire if rigid social assumptions are true. To be transgender is to transgress barriers that were never created by you, and, instead, to approach your identity with curiosity.
Hey, so this is why y'all are getting defunded. This is why the Trump administration and Elon are cutting back on research and federal science investments and these kinds of things and trying to audit them and review them, because y'all have allowed ideology to interfere with and supersede genuine scientific inquiry, at least in a fair chunk of what's being done in taxpayer-funded science. Certainly not all of it. There's lots of good, productive, important stuff being done, but y'all have allowed this kind of ideology and activism to infiltrate it. I mean, listen to the crowd cheer. They should be booing this person who is giving the scientific community a bad name. And if they're doing important cancer research or other things, like many of the rally attendees say, they should not want to be associated with ideological political campaigners who are trying to hijack science, like this woman clearly is. She wasn't the only one. The Stand Up for Science rally also featured non-scientists, but activist, liberal activist who kind of masquerades as a science commentator, Bill Nye, who you might remember has all sorts of wacky views about gender pseudoscience and trans issues and that kind of stuff. It also featured him taking just partisan cheap shots at Republicans. Take a listen to this clip.
Over there, my friends, is the U.S. Capitol. To the other side, the side restricting access to scientific reports, scientific data and resources. We ask, what are you afraid of? What is it about the process of science, modern medicine, caring for our neighbors, or Women's History Month that you all find so scary?
So he said this specifically about the other side of the aisle, meaning he's taking a shot at Republicans saying they don't care about their neighbors and hate women's history, and that's why they want to reform and cut a lot of different science policies and departments of the federal government and our taxpayer funds that are going to finance this stuff. Yeah, that's actually not a good look. If you're trying to prove that science isn't partisan, it's not political, getting up there and taking highly partisan cheap shots to the applause of the audience comprised of scientists. It's not hitting the way you think it hits, Bill. It is simply not. Now I'm going to show you the cringiest part of this entire event after this. People constantly ask me where they can get truly fair and unbiased news, but the truth is there's no such thing. The only way to sort fact from fiction and get to the real truth is to know what both sides are saying, which is why I've used Ground News for years. Ground News gathers related articles from around the world in one place, with context about the source's political leaning, reliability, and ownership, so you can compare coverage and quickly understand the bigger picture. For example, you guys remember the story we covered a couple of weeks ago about the intelligence community employees in official government chats who were talking about sex changes, genital surgeries, and other very explicit material? Well, a story like that is so subject to bias and partisan spin that you can only really find out what's happening with Ground News. Right-leaning media highlighted the most inflammatory parts of the story, like the Post-Millennial, where their headline reads, CIA NSA officials use government chat to say they want intersex babies so children can choose gender later. Meanwhile, using Ground News, we can see that not very many left-of-center outlets covered this story, but the left-leaning LGBT media outlets that did cover it very much downplayed the scandal. Pink News writes, NSA staff accused of sex chats at work, but they were just discussing LGBTQ+ issues. This really puts media bias on full display, because describing those highly graphic chats as just discussing LGBTQ issues might be the understatement of the century. It is so hard to deal with information overload and the sensationalism of modern media and figure out what's really going on. But that's a key part of my job here on this show, and it's why I use Ground News all the time, and I'm happy to recommend it to you guys. You can get the same plan that I use, which is the Vantage subscription, if you sign up through the link on screen in the description, ground.news/Brad, or scan the QR code on screen to get unlimited access to every feature on the platform for just $5 a month. Sign up now, you'll be glad you did. So, former NIH director Francis Collins, who was kind of an infamous scientific official in the federal government during the COVID debacle where they got so many things wrong, took the stage in defense of science and scientific funding, which honestly, dude, given how badly your tenure went, you might helping more if you just stayed out of the camera, but he got up there and sang a very bizarre song about it. Take a look at this clip, which I promise is real.
This is a song for all the good people. We're joined together by this noble dream. Well, this is a song for all of those dreamers. We're looking for answers to come our way. Scientists, doctors, students, all seekers, we share in the hopes for a much brighter day.
So, sorry, Francis, but that was cringe, and you probably shouldn't give up your day job, although I know you're retired on cushy federal benefits, so I don't know, if that was supposed to show us how serious and amazing and legit our scientific community is and how they couldn't possibly have their funding cut, it did not achieve that goal, I'll simply say. And I'm sorry, but this guy, Francis Collins, is actually somebody who personally embodies why people have lost trust in scientific institutions and scientists and why there is this backlash. Even if you don't fully support it, we should understand why people feel this way, because they were lied to and gaslit for years by the scientists and the science who were highly politicized during COVID and pushed all sorts of nonsensical and unsupported ideas rooted in ideology, not science, from keeping schools closed for months and months and even years in some places, to dismissing the COVID lab leak theory as a conspiracy theory, even though it ended up being a completely mainstream, legitimate hypothesis. Francis Collins personally participated in that campaign. He also worked to discredit what he called fringe epidemiologists who participated in the Great Barrington Declaration against COVID lockdowns. Their takes aged pretty well, actually, but he tried to discredit them at the time so they could move forward with nobody asking questions and nobody pushing back on really drastic COVID policies that did incredible damage. So this guy is actually the face of the problem, and he's getting up here, singing a little song like, babe, you should have sat this one out. But the very group that organized this protest itself perfectly reveals why they're being defunded and why there's this pushback and this loss of trust in scientists. On the official Stand Up for Science website, they warn people to bring masks, writing, "This has always been good practice at protests and is even better practice now. Protect yourself and others from COVID-19, other viruses, measles, and pepper spray by wearing a medical grade mask." Again, this is ideology, not science. COVID barely spreads outdoors. We've known this for a very long time. And outdoor masking is not a COVID prevention strategy, which also everybody's over that anyway. And pretty much everybody has been exposed to COVID by now. Like, if that's supposed to reassure us that these are very serious, not at all ideological scientists, again, didn't hit the way they thought it did. And some of their very policy goals are deeply ideological. For example, they have on their website, the Stand Up for Science movement, defend diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in science. Now, of course, like anything, science and government scientific institutions shouldn't discriminate against people, but that's not what DEI is. DEI is the toxic, identitarian, equity-focused approach that does reverse discrimination and reinforces divides between groups. And it's rightly being rejected, and it's a deeply political and controversial idea, yet here they are saying, no, DEI is part of science. No, it isn't, and you're revealing yourself to be ideological activists with this kind of thing. Now, I do want to be clear. I'm actually sympathetic to some of their complaints. For example, they talk about the censorship, as they call it, from the federal government, determining what can be studied, what words can be used on government websites, what things and words can be used in published papers. And I think a lot of that is too heavy-handed. For example, they're putting out words you can't use on the CDC research or CDC websites. And hang on, even if those words are ideological or seem woke or whatever, well, sometimes to discuss things, you need to be able to use the language, like transgender or like even biological female and biological male have been flagged in some of these policies. I do think the Trump administration is overstepping on some of that stuff. In the same way, I think the funding definitely needs to be looked at, but some of what they're doing with the indirect cost caps, I think, has been flagged by serious people as potentially causing problems. And obviously, there's an important role for government to fund real, important, legitimate, non-ideological science. But they're not making this case credibly when they're yapping about how science is queer, taking partisan cheap shots and singing like hippies and swaying like this is Coachella or something. All as part of a group that's pushing outdoor masking in 2025 and embracing and pushing DEI as part of science. Yeah, I'm sorry, but to me, this whole protest, this whole display was a hot mess that honestly seems to have done far more harm than good. And that's a shame because there's some legitimate criticisms to be had here, and like so many things, we're witnessing a pendulum swing. Science got so woke and so politicized that now the Trump administration is taking a hammer to it, and maybe the pendulum is swinging too far to the other extreme in some ways. But when you have this kind of movement, and you have them doubling down on the very things that caused this backlash, it's much harder to make that pushback and to have that nuance because they're simply proving their point every day when they do stuff like this. Other than that, though, they're doing amazing. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Do take a second and hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Oh, and remember, guys, the Your Delulu is Showing merch items are now all available. We got really great sweatshirts and long sleeves and really cool mugs. I love getting the notes when you guys buy them and you write like how much you love the show or a note. I love reading those. My boyfriend worked really hard on putting it together, so if you can check it out, please do. He really appreciates you guys checking out the merch and supporting the show. All right, and up next, some Republicans are teaming up with AOC on economics. So this surprised me when I first saw it, but Republican Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, a Florida Republican, is teaming up with AOC and Bernie Sanders to push forward an economic plan that is very controversial. It would cap interest rates on credit cards, but potentially have some very serious unintended consequences. Take a listen to this reporting from The Hill.
Congresswomen Anna Paulina Luna and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a very conservative Republican and a very left-leaning Democrat, have come together on new legislation.
On Friday, they introduced a bill that would cap credit card interest rates at 10%.
Now, Luna wrote on X, "For too long, credit card companies have abused working-class Americans with absurd interest rates, trapping them in an almost insurmountable amount of debt. We need a fair solution. That means getting rid of the status quo and putting a reasonable cap on interest rates." Right now, the average credit card interest rate is a little under 29%, according to Forbes. Now, according to the Fed, the lowest credit card interest rate ever was about 11.88% during the 2008 recession.
So I'm here to rain on the parade and point out that this bipartisanship is all actually a terrible idea. Honestly, Representative Luna should know this because she actually specifically campaigned back several years ago when she ran for Congress as the opposite of Bernie and AOC when it comes to economics. Take a look at this video.
I am a millennial, I am a Latina, and I am the exact opposite of AOC, and that is exactly why more people like myself are needed in office. And at the end of the day, you have people like Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who are actively preaching socialism as if it's a good thing, that it's, this land of good and plenty, when in actuality, one, who's going to pay for that, and two, to, give government total power in the way that they're wanting it is absolutely dangerous. Socialism comes at the price tag, the price of the individual, the price at, bankrupting countries, and the price that eventually ends up in human life. And I in no way, shape, or form believe that a socialist agenda belongs in the United States government.
So now she's in Congress teaming up with them on an economic plan with these self-described socialist left-wing lawmakers. Yeah, you probably should know better than that, given the fact that you ran to specifically offer something different. To be clear, that doesn't mean she's wrong. Economic reality and unintended consequences are why she's wrong. This would basically just ban most credit cards as they currently exist and ban most people from accessing credit cards. If you want to do that, if you want to ensure that only very affluent people with very high credit scores can access credit cards, say that. Say, we are banning most middle income, low income, or even some middle class people who don't have amazing credit scores. We're just going to ban them from having credit cards. Say it with your chest, be honest about it, because you can't force companies to offer people credit cards at very low interest rates that are way below what they would expect in a market. They just won't offer them to people. I mean, the lowest credit card rate ever recorded is, like they said at the Hill, 11-something%. I have excellent credit, and my personal credit cards are all in the 20s of percentage. And to be clear, I don't run credit on them, and I don't recommend that people do, but I do make the most of points, and I use them responsibly. And here we have government officials trying to micromanage my life and ban them, basically, or totally restructure them and just do away with them as we know it, and frankly, get rid of most of the rewards programs and other things like that. If your plan is to help low-income people who are finding themselves in credit card debt by banning them from accessing credit cards, at least say that and be honest. Don't act like, oh, we're going to have this magic solution where everyone can have credit cards at 10% interest rates, because that's not what's going to actually happen. So you're selling people a lie. And you're not helping these low-income people here. You always have to think about not just the goals, which I'm sure they want to help people, but the unintended consequences of government micromanaging of people's finances and meddling in the economy. What would truly happen, frankly, is that a lot of poor people would turn to payday loans, which have even higher, more obscene interest rates. Some of them would turn to under-the-table loan sharks who might break their legs if they can't pay them back. A lot of people would actually be left significantly worse off. And because you're not addressing the root of the problem, which is that the cost of living is too high and people's wages aren't high enough, so they're falling behind and they're having to use credit cards, which is not a wise financial decision. And some of them, it might just be because of financial literacy, but many of them genuinely probably can't keep up. You are putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole in a way that actually might make the bleeding worse. And this kind of thing is maddening to me because I don't expect any better from Bernie Sanders or AOC. They don't understand economics. They're self-described socialists, right? Like, they're going to want the government to micromanage people's decisions. But Republicans hopping on board with this, Representative Luna, Josh Hawley, all these people, it's like the Republican Party just increasingly straying away from the traditional free market capitalist principles it stood for that, frankly, are a key part of American prosperity and success. And when they find themselves agreeing with socialists about economics, that should be a red flag, frankly. And the fact that these people don't seem to be picking up on that cue and reevaluating the populist legislation they're pushing tells me one of two things. They either need remedial economic courses stat, or they know that these policies are actually unworkable and foolish, but they just want to capitalize on the populist wave and sentiment of the moment to grow their profiles and advance their popularity, and they don't actually care all the downstream economic consequences these plans would have if they become law. Which is worse? I'll let you decide. What do you think? Do you agree with these proposals? If you do, I want to hear you out in the comments, so let me know what you think. And now, we'll run through some quick hits, some stories that came across my desk over the weekend that I want to share with you guys so we can laugh and cry together. Up first, this flight attendant was fired for twerking and is now playing the victim. Take a listen to this clip from Inside Edition.
She's the flight attendant whose twerking cost her dream job.
I didn't think that, being so happy can turn into something like this.
Nell Diallo was having a great time dancing and twerking in the aisle on an empty plane before an early morning flight.
I decided to just take advantage of the moment to wake myself up and kind of get myself hyped up for my day, basically.
She posted the video on TikTok along with the caption, "What's wrong with a little twerk before work?" But after the video went viral, she says Alaska Airlines fired her. What did they say to you?
They just said that I broke their social media policy. For them to terminate me without giving me a chance, it just was unfair.
What's wrong with a little twerk before work? Well, a lot actually, when what you actually do is twerk at work in your uniform and then post it on the internet. I don't know, maybe I'm heartless, but I simply don't feel particularly bad for this woman. I know that personal responsibility and facing consequences for your actions is kind of out of vogue in society today, but I'm still a strong proponent in those things, and she should have read the social media policy that her employer, the airline, gave her when she was presented with all this information, known that this wasn't allowed, and not done it. It's just not a good look for a company to have their employees doing sexually suggestive dances on the job in their uniforms. If she was just twerking, with her friends and she posted it in her regular clothes, but also happened to be an airline employee, I wouldn't want her fired for that or disciplined for that. That's totally different. But yeah, doing sexually suggestive dances on the job is inappropriate. And if you break the rules at your job, you might get fired. So for her then to play the victim and say it's unfair, it's really not. You messed around and you found out. Now, I will say, could they have given her a warning or some consequences short of just totally firing her? Maybe. Maybe it's a little excessive. Maybe it's harsh. But she doesn't seem remorseful or regretful. I'd have a lot more sympathy for her if she did. She seems like she thinks she didn't do anything wrong. And she obviously did, and obviously doesn't have respect for her employers and their policies. And just more broadly, we need to normalize people having to sleep in the bed they made for themselves, winning stupid prizes when they play stupid games. I don't know where as a society we got off just telling people that they can do whatever they want and then not expect to face the consequences of it. I'm a huge believer in personal freedom and individual liberty, but that also comes with personal consequences and personal responsibility. That's my take, but do you feel bad for her? Let me know in the comments if any of you do. And to the precious few straight men who watch my videos, don't allow the shaken booty to sway your opinion, okay? Up next, another TikToker is calling for violence against Trump, and this one has a twist.
A white person has to do it, okay? And we all know what it is, but we're missing heavy context on these videos I see circulating talking about who's gonna do it, a white person has to do it. We all know this, okay? What color was Katniss? Look what happened to Rue, okay? One of y'all please just take one for the f***ing team, all right? Why is everything about race? Because it is. It's always been. So shut up and get with the program.
He seems stable and not at all insane. I love how they had to make it a woke race thing, too. Not only are they calling for violence against the sitting president of the United States with their whole chest on social media, which, by the way, at FBI, at Secret Service, come get your mans. They're also insisting that the person who does it has to be a privileged white person or something. Y'all are demented. But over 40,000 people liked this video, thought that he was onto something, not that he was insane. America might be cooked. Up next, this MSNBC guest just accidentally insulted Americans while trying to advocate for Ukraine. Take a listen to this interesting clip.
The person who's watching,
yes,
who just heard you say Donald Trump is not standing up for Ukraine. What do you say to the person who says, well, I don't care about Ukraine. I want Donald Trump to stand up for America? What do you say to them?
I don't know where you got that. I mean, I don't have time for it.
Yes, but we hear it. We hear it.
Here's the thing. Where did you grow up? Did you grow up in a place where you thought the Russians were the good guys? What part of America did you grow up in where they taught you the Russians were the good guys and our allies were the bad guys? That's the flip here that we need to continue to remind people. The Russians are the bad guys. They're women. They're killing children. They're bombing cities. The Ukrainians are the noble good guys. In some ways, they're more American than we are over the last couple of years. And we must stand with them in the same way we stood with the Allies in World War II and since this country was founded.
So, yikes. Just yikes. Look, my sympathies are with the Ukrainian people, and I think Putin's invasion is unjustified and evil. Some of the scenes out of Ukraine over the last couple of years are just absolutely horrific, but this is not the way to advocate that Americans should support Ukraine. Say they're more American than we are, which is just weird. Can't you compliment them without insulting Americans? And then two, rejecting the premise of the host's question, which was very clear, that a lot of people in this country feel that we need to put America first and focus on America and what's happening here, not be the world's policeman, not fixing everyone else's problems. So if you want to support Ukraine financially through taxpayers or through military resources, and I have friends and people I respect who fall down on either side of that question. I personally support Ukraine, but I'm very, very skeptical of the idea of sending them billions of dollars of taxpayer resources. But if you want to make the case for that, you have to argue why it's in America's interest to do so. And there are arguments to be made, but simply dismissing them and saying, no, you should care about Ukraine. Well, that's easy to say when you're an ideological armchair commentator who's sitting in a New York City studio. But a lot of people who can't afford groceries aren't waking up every day thinking about Ukraine. And that doesn't make them evil or mean they deserve to be belittled. And if you want to keep taking their money and sending it overseas, you have to at least respect them enough to make the case honestly as to why they should do so. Or you can keep pushing this narrative, but don't act shocked when people keep moving away from your position. Up next, somebody needs to take Trump's social media away because the president just posted something kind of wild on Truth Social. From his official account on Truth Social, Trump posted an article with the headline, "Shut up about egg prices. Trump is saving consumers millions." It's a link to the Daily Caller, an article written by conservative activist Charlie Kirk. So egg prices are insanely high right now, and that hurts American families when they're grocery shopping because eggs are an important part of a lot of families' diets. And the president just shared an article titled, "Shut up about egg prices." Yeah, that's not it. That is not the messaging. That is not the right tactic to take. Can y'all imagine if Biden had done that during the inflation that he had and the high prices, shared something that said, "Shut up and stop complaining about grocery prices"? Like, what? People on the right would freak out and be very upset about it, and for good reason. Now, to be clear, the article itself explains, and I think this is true, that the current high egg prices are not Donald Trump's fault. They're a result of bird flu that resulted in a huge culling of hens, egg-laying hens, that massively decreased the supply and is causing this temporary price shock. It's not Trump's fault, and that's totally fair to argue, but don't tell people to stop complaining about the price. That comes off as totally tone deaf and obnoxious messaging, and I think a lot of Republicans would be very upset by it if it was a Democrat saying the same thing. What do you guys think? Do you sympathize with that message from President Trump? I personally do not. All right, everybody, that'll be it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button before you go. Remember to check out the merch, and we'll talk again real soon.